Hello, this is Henry of AutoAnalysis. Welcome to the September 2013 edition of the European Car and Light Commercial Vehicle Production Outlook briefing video. As usual, we'll start with a look back at last year. Well, last year we saw European production, including Russia, at 18.2 million, which is around a million down on 2011. But if we take Russia out of the European total, Europe was just 16.6 million, down 1.75 million. And the complete collapse in production in Europe was prevented by modest growth across the Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, and indeed the UK, plus a major boost in production in Slovakia due to the VW Up starting production. So partial recovery in production in 2013, as we will see in the figures which follow. This is due to continued growth in the UK, Spain rather interestingly, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia and Turkey, i.e. most of the growth is due to Eastern Europe. The Spanish growth is actually due partly to Audi and indeed PSA production taking place in northern Spain at Vigo for emerging markets, rather counterintuitively. The big losers in 2012 were Italy, down 119,000, France down just over 260,000, Spain down just over 400,000, and even Germany was down just over 500,000. The German decline was due to the fall in production at Ford and Opel, and model cycle effects at Mercedes and Audi, and the switch to the new Golf at Volkswagen. If we look at the recovery, or the best case recovery highlights, we can see that we believe that Germany will recover, and indeed by 2018 it will be back to above its 2007 level, but it won't actually be back at its 2011 peak, which was somewhat artificial, largely a reflection of the scrappage schemes that were still in operation then. But there will be some long-term losers, and by 2018 we expect France to be down around a third, that's around 960,000 on its 2007 production volumes. That's even allowing for Renault's renewed commitment to French production. Italy will be down by around 28%, 340,000 or so. Spain down around 17%, around 480,000 on the 2007 volumes. And that even allows for the reorganisation at Fiat and Renault's continued expansion in Spain and the commitment of VW and PSA in Spain. The eastward shift that we noted before will continue, and between 2012 and 2018 the Czech Republic will grow another 13%, Hungary will almost double, Romania will grow by a third, and Turkey will grow by 50%. We also need to take into account the fact that Morocco is part of Renault's European production network now, with most of the output from its two factories there actually coming into the greater European region. And while this is all taking place, we still think that UK production will continue to grow by as much as a third between 2012 and 2018, especially if Mini, JLR and Nissan fulfil their expectations. We think the UK will reach over 2 million by that time, and with the recent good news from JLR, we certainly think this will be achieved. Here we see the European car and LCV production totals by country between 2007 and 2018. And what this seems to suggest is that the market in terms of production will recover reasonably well from 2014 onwards, especially from 2015. But in fact, if we take out Russia, which is the green block roughly in the halfway up the bars, the reality is somewhat different, as we will see on the next chart. Here we see that whereas in the base outlook, including Russia, European production was trending towards something like 23-24 million by 2017-2018, without Russia, the picture is somewhat different, and it doesn't even get to 21 million by those dates, either in the base outlook or some alternative scenarios, the details of which are fully provided in the main report. And what this suggests is that it will take Europe until at least 2017 to recover to the 2007 volumes. That is not particularly attractive. However, it could be rather worse than that. And here we see how much worse it could be if European sales continue to decline. What this chart shows is the base outlook which is the blue line at the top of the chart, followed by a pink line, which is the base outlook excluding Russia. And the widening gap between the blue and the pink lines highlights the importance of Russian production to Europe's total. And that gap gets bigger, indicating how Russia's production itself is increasing. If you look at the other figures, we have some alternative scenarios, which we call our worst case scenarios, and we look in particular at the purple and the turquoise line towards the bottom. That shows what would happen if we have continued falls in 2013 and 2014. This would not only delay the long-term recovery, but it also suggests that if the market takes a further fall and then is slow at recovering, we'll have the European market settling down at rather reduced volumes compared to even our more optimistic scenarios. And we think that Europe, and that is the industry as a whole, and the authorities need to consider the implications of scenario 5 and 6. And certainly if European production in the long run, excluding Russia, is at 16.5 million or so, i.e. the purple line at the bottom, scenario 6, we then believe that the current industry structure with all the vehicle manufacturers that we have in the market is actually sustainable. So what are the vehicle companies doing in terms of restructuring and refocusing? Well, faced with continued and rising losses, Ford, GM and PSA have announced plant closures. Ford, for example, closing Genk, GM closing Bochum, PSA closing Aulnay in Paris. Fiat is actually reallocating production between its Italian factories. It's slimming down, but not actually closing factories. It's planning to bring back production of one model from Mexico to Poland to increase utilization there, and it's rather optimistically, in our view, planning to use its European factories as global export bases for Fiat, Alfa, and indeed the Jeep brands. That includes exporting Jeeps from Serbia and some Turkish plants. Renault has reached union agreement on severe cost-cutting, but it's also increasing its commitment to French and Spanish production. It's adding Nissan car production to its European portfolio, i.e. in France, and it's adding increased production in Turkey and Morocco, largely for European markets, which may indeed undercut some of its more vulnerable plants in France and Spain. GM and PSA have also established a defensive alliance covering logistics, purchasing and new models, although the benefits from these are not yet fully apparent, and we don't expect new models from this venture to appear before 2016-17 at best. So will further cuts be required if demand and production falls again? We think that's highly probable that Fiat and Renault will actually need to cut further into their fixed cost base, and that could, despite denials so far, mean plant closures. PSA, Ford and GM have said they won't cut any more in Europe. At least not for now. Let us now turn to the restructuring and refocusing of their activities which the vehicle manufacturers are undertaking in Europe. The volume manufacturers have been faced with continued and rising losses, and Ford, GM and PSA have responded by announcing plant closures. Fiat, by contrast, is reallocating production between its Italian factories. It's slimming down but not actually closing plants. It's bringing production back from Mexico to Poland to improve utilization there, and it's planning to use its European factories as global export bases. Renault has reached agreement with its unions on various cost-cutting measures, and is increasing its commitment to its French and Spanish production plants. One thing it's also doing is adding production of Nissans to its factory in Flins, near Paris, and it's also increasing production in Turkey and Morocco, largely for European markets. And the increase in production in Morocco is important because we now include this within our European production numbers. GM and PSA have also established what we call a defensive alliance, covering their logistics, purchasing and new model development programs. The benefits of this alliance are not yet fully apparent, and the new models from this program will not actually appear really before 2016 or 17. We do wonder, however, if further cuts will be required if demand and production falls yet again, and it remains probable that Fiat and Renault will need to cut further into their fixed cost bases, while PSA, Ford and GM for now deny that they will cut further in Europe, although we wouldn't be surprised to see this being revisited in the near future. The next issue concerns the extent to which export markets beyond Europe can be the saviour of Europe's production. German and UK premium and luxury brands have been very dependent on US and Chinese demand for much of their recent growth, and it's true that to date these markets have held up reasonably well. But the European brands' production activities in NAFTA and China is increasing, and that will actually reduce how much of their non-EU export demand will actually be supplied by European production in the long run, especially at the volume brands. VW Group, Fiat, PSA and the premium brands BMW and Mercedes are all increasing production outside Europe, especially in NAFTA, Brazil and China. And JLR will also be producing in China in due course. Volkswagen is increasing its production in Mexico, Audi is building a new plant there, BMW is widening its US production portfolio and building a plant in Brazil, and Mercedes will expand production in Brazil as well. Now, some of these moves will actually harm struggling European production sites. In particular, as we've noted before, Renault Dacia production in Morocco is growing, and this will have some impact on Renault and possibly Dacia's production in Europe, because production will be supplied from Morocco back into Europe itself. In conclusion, we don't see any sustained recovery in European production before 2014, and quite probably not before 2015. And when the recovery does come, the revival will be somewhat shallower and slower than post-2008-9. It's possible, moreover, that European production volumes, excluding Russia, will turn out to be below the 2007-8 peaks in the long run. The implications of this have not yet been fully worked out by the industry and authorities. European vehicle production was, moreover, not financially robust even in the boom times. We have to ask how much longer can major European vehicle manufacturers support these operations if losses continue. It's true that Ford, GM and PSA have started cutting back their European operations, but GM is very committed to Opel Vauxhall, and Renault has actually raised investment in France and Spain. We wonder if these moves will really be sustainable in the long run. Certainly we expect further restructuring and capacity cutbacks will be required at some point. The only question is when. It's also highly likely that a major European name could be absorbed into another vehicle group or disappear entirely by the end of the decade. While this is happening, the rising strength of the Koreans and Nissan and the enduring appeal of the German and UK premium brands should not be underestimated. The pressure on the volume brands will increase and will be impossible to ignore. And all of this will take place without us considering the impact of the Chinese who are now appearing on Europe's fringe. When we will be able to consider them as a serious player is another question. Thank you for listening. Details are now on the screen telling you how you can access the full report. We hope you will enjoy reading this, and we look forward to receiving questions from you on this. Thank you and goodbye.